Campbell, welcome to the Calm Mom podcast. So grateful to have you with us today. Thanks for being here.
I'm really excited to be here, Michelle.
Okay, so we're going to talk all things breath today, and we're going to make it super practical for you guys listening. And I kind of want to start here because I feel like, we hit people listening, hit play. You and I here, we're talking, everyone's breathing, presumably, right? And my understanding is that most of us are not doing it right, or we're doing it wrong, or we really have no idea what we're doing. We're taking, I don't know, 20,000 breaths a day, but we're not even paying attention to most of them. So can we start there maybe and hear a little bit about your story and exploration of breath and how most of us don't know how to breathe?
Yeah, it's such a wonderful jumping off point. And I think, I can speak for myself and I can speak for the many clients I work with and practitioners I work with. It's often something we take for granted until we become aware of it, whether that's a problem or asthma or panic or something kind of like strikes this chord where it's like, oh, wait, breathing matters. But for the vast majority of people, prior to that moment, it's just like, it just happens, right? It's like, it's this thing that's going on in the background. And I think that's just it's a missed opportunity for lack of a better description. Like breath, when we start to kind of tap into it, it's this like wealth of information about like what's happening in our nervous system, what's happening with our emotional state, like how we're responding to the world. And so much of what people will describe, in terms of like symptoms that they experience, we can often, is preceded by changes in their breathing, but they don't know what to look for. And so I often make the analogy, like breath is kind of like a language. If you've ever tried to learn a new language, at the start, it's kind of like, it's just noise. If I'm standing in front of two people speaking Spanish and I don't speak Spanish, it is just noise. But as I start to kind of like develop and I understand and it's like, I'll pick up words here and there, and eventually I'll kind of gain the context of a conversation, and eventually I can communicate. And so for a lot of people, they might hear of like breath work. It's pretty popular right now. And they kind of, maybe do some breath awareness, or they're kind of questioning, but what am I paying attention to? I'm just breathing. And that's the same point of like, if you were just starting to learn a language, you wouldn't know what people are talking about. It requires a bit of patience and time and consistency. But the end result, if you stick with it, is like this line of communication. Like it's a two-way communication, like between ourselves and kind of what's happening in our body. And one of the biggest issues I see people face today is this element of like lacking control or uncertainty, or, it's like, and so what greater way to develop a sense of control than to control the thing that controls everything else? Like our breath, it touches every system in our body.
Yeah.
And so when we can start to grasp like, okay, well, how do I use my breath to change how I feel, to manage my emotions, to manage my stresses, then it kind of doesn't matter what's going on out there. There's always something that you can control, right? And it just happens to be that thing you're controlling does have this kind of far-reaching impact on everything else.
Yeah. Okay. This is so good. So talk to us a little bit about like the science behind how this happens. So if we're breathing in a certain way, what's the physiological response, or how might that impact our reactions or our thoughts, or, especially in like the day-to-day things that we might take for granted?
Yeah, this is an amazing question. So I always like let's think evolutionarily.
Okay.
If we go back, for the last 2 million years, essentially, our breath has kind of been this like gateway between the outside world and the inside world, right? The example often that gets given when people are talking about the nervous system, it's like the tiger jumps out of the bushes, and it triggers this fight or flight. Like if you're running away from a tiger, what are you doing? You're breathing really fast and shallow. And so for all of evolution, right, my brain and body have responded very predictably to the way that I'm breathing. If I'm breathing really quickly, right, for all of evolution, that has signaled that something stressful is happening. Maybe I'm running away from a threat. Maybe I'm chasing my food. Maybe I'm, it's like there's action going on. Yeah. And vice versa. If I'm breathing really slow and steady and rhythmical, it's unlikely that anything threatening is happening. Because that's how we've evolved, right? No one's running from the tiger and breathing really slowly. It's never happened, never will. And so when we take that and we understand, okay, so the brain responds really predictably to changes in breath because that's how it's always been. Think of, there's a near miss, someone swipes past you in a car or someone cuts you off. What do we, that gasp,
Yeah.
like you didn't decide to do that. That was
No.
an automated response. And that triggers my nervous system to say something's happening,
Yeah.
right? Increase alertness, increase vigilance. And so when we take that piece and say, like, okay, my brain and my body respond really predictably to changes in my breath,
Hmm.
that opens up this doorway for us to then understand, okay, well, how would I use that to create a change, right? Or to
Hmm.
kind of change what my nervous system is responding to.
Yeah.
The problem that a lot of people face today is that because they sit at a desk for longer than perhaps we've done in the past, maybe
Hmm.
they're a little bit more sedentary than they have been, maybe had a couple of kids and the changes that a woman's body goes through, maybe they've had back pain and that has interrupted the way they breathe. So there's all these factors that can cause my breathing to change, but this 2 million-year-old part of my brain is responding the exact same way. So I
Yeah.
might be sitting on the couch watching Netflix, but I'm
Mhm.
breathing quickly. And so my brain's like, where's the threat?
Yeah.
What am I running away from something? Am I in danger? And it
Yeah.
continues to keep the nervous system in that mode of threat detection. And so there's this kind of like untapped area where people may be breathing incorrectly or ineffectively,
Uh-huh.
but they fail to recognize like how the nervous system is interpreting that, right? And it's interpreting it the same way it's interpreted for 2 million years. Where it gets even more tricky is like social media,
Yeah.
technology, AI, right? The news, like these really new things in the scheme of evolution. Like my brain doesn't know that when I'm watching the news that it's on the other side of the world and it's not actually threatening to me right now. Like it
Yeah.
responds the same way. So we've
Yeah.
got all these new inputs, right, that are causing me to change the way that I breathe. And but then at the base level, my nervous system responds the same way it always has. It's like something threatening's happening, and I'm
Yeah.
going to allocate all my resources to survive, and I'm not going to allocate my resources to recover and repair and restore because
Yeah.
it seems like something threatening's happening all of the time. Because I
Yes.
can open up my phone and I can be on social media or there's an email from my boss, and those things are always interacting with my breath. And so,
Yeah.
like the science behind it, in my mind, that the most important piece for people to understand is that your brain and your body are always listening to how you breathe,
Yeah.
right? And using that as information of like, what's the appropriate state for me to be in?
Yeah.
And if I'm breathing quickly, the appropriate state is to be in that sympathetic fight, flight, action, survival. And so learning how to breathe in a way that tells my nervous system that the world is safe
Hmm.
is an incredibly important thing for me to be able to actually facilitate, right? Healing, recovery,
Yeah.
repair, restoration.
Yeah. And it's one of the easiest things for us to consciously manipulate, right? Once we have the awareness, it's like so empowering. It's like, cool, I can
Yeah.
actually learn how to do this.
And no equipment, right? It doesn't,
Right.
wherever you are, whatever you're doing, it doesn't matter. Like your breath's always there. It just requires that investment up front of learning, okay, well, how do I use my breath to support the state that I want to be in?
Okay. Can we talk about that for a minute? Because I think there's people that are like, okay, this is so interesting. And I know when I started to grow in awareness about my breath, at first I was like, okay, I just want to avoid quick breathing or I just want to avoid shallow breathing. Is there more to it than that? Like, what kind of things should people be aware of in their breathing that aren't actually servicing them well or are increasing that state of heightened alertness or what have you? And then how do we actually want to be breathing? And I'm sure there's more to it, right? Layers to that onion. But tell us just a little bit, some good starting points, maybe.
Yeah, so let's kind of start with the broad, and then we'll like zoom it into something that's a little bit more practical.
Okay.
The way that I teach, right? So if we think of rate, rhythm, depth, and tone, which I'll explain each of these, right? The
Okay.
rate is like fast or slow, right?
Okay.
And so with each of these things, if we just kind of break down, so actually just to give us a little bit of background, so if everyone's familiar with the nervous system, we kind of have, think about it like two channels. One
Mm-hmm.
channel for action, survival, right, which is the sympathetic nervous system, and then one channel for kind of repair, recovery, and that's the parasympathetic. And so we want to kind of think of breathing through the lens of what is it doing to my nervous system, right? What is it informing my nervous system about the state of the world? So if
Mm-hmm.
we start with rate, right? Fast breathing tells me to be in that sympathetic state because of
Mm-hmm.
the example we just gave, right? Forever, if I'm running away from a threat, I'm breathing quickly,
Yeah.
right? So fast is going to stimulate that sympathetic part of the nervous system. Slow breathing is going to do the opposite, right? And so when we breathe slow, we actually see brainwaves slow down. We see heart rate slow down, right? We start to shift into that mode where my body again is perceiving safety, and that's super important. right? So if I'm breathing quickly versus if I'm breathing slowly, that's going to change the channel of my nervous system. The next one being rhythm.
Okay.
Now, by rhythm, like, are we breathing in this like nice even cadence, or is it erratic? It stops and it starts, and I'm holding, and then I'm starting again. Again, if we think through the lens of the nervous system, this like consistency and predictability and rhythmicity, I love that word, it's very soothing to the nervous system,
Yeah.
right? It's telling the nervous system there's nothing unpredictable coming, there's nothing that I'm not sure of, like my breath is nice and consistent,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that makes, again, my heart rate, my brain waves kind of sync up with that. Whereas if my breath is a little bit chaotic and it's a bit erratic, right? I'm holding my breath and I don't even know I'm doing that, and then I'm gasping, and then there's that big sigh, and then I'm going quickly and slowly. Like, that's telling my nervous system I have no idea what's happening out there, right?
Yeah.
There could be something coming from over here, and this threat, and the thing that I'm remembering, and the thing I'm preparing for next week. And so that creates a level of chaos in the nervous
Yeah.
system because it's just like changing all the time. Depth, right? Are we breathing deep or are we breathing shallow?
Okay.
And so again, we're kind of coming back to that my breath is designed to prepare the body, right, for what's coming. So if I start breathing really deep, my brain's like, okay, we're about to go for a run. We're about to chase our food, right? And so it changes, like it increases metabolism. It prepares us for energy production. We might start to secrete some cortisol or some adrenaline, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when we start to kind of like bring the volume of the breath down, right, and it's this kind of slower, softer, then we get the opposite function occurring, right?
Mm.
Now, this one gets a little bit tricky because a lot of people that experience anxiety will reflect on shallow breathing, right? But it's shallow and fast, right?
Uh,
When we breathe shallow and really slow, right, almost like I'm not breathing, that can be
mm.
really calming for the nervous system. It's when we combine that shallow breath with a faster breath that we then kind of ramp up the nervous system response.
Okay, that
And then
makes
the
sense.
final one I mentioned there was tone, right? And this is
Mm-hmm.
just a term that I use, but think of the difference between a sob and a sigh, right? Or,
Okay.
like
Yeah.
there's even as you hear me doing that, you could be like, oh, wait, that sounds like, well, my
Yep.
kid about to have a meltdown versus like this relaxed release. And
Yeah.
so we can kind of create this flavor or this tone to the breath that can also suggest to the nervous system what's going on. Now, we kind of laid out a lot there. What the most, I would argue, the simplest thing for people to kind of take away and use, right, is fast or slow, right? Deep or shallow. And we probably need to use a better term than shallow, right? But we can kind of think of like where, right? So if I'm
Mhm.
breathing up into my chest versus down low in my belly,
Okay.
right? And if I'm breathing with my nose or my mouth. And so if we always kind of come back to, right? And I like to play this game with people. If you ask someone how many times they check their phone, right? They'll be like, oh, quite a few, like might be 20, might be 50, might be 100 times a day. What if every time we checked our phone, we also checked our breath, right? And this
Mm.
is like a 3-second practice, right? And
Yeah.
we checked, am I breathing through my nose or my mouth, right? And if my mouth is open, I just close it, right? So the nose is much more linked to the parasympathetic nervous system, the mouth a bit more the sympathetic. Am I breathing up into my chest or am I breathing down into my belly? Right? And
Mm-hmm.
again, if I can feel the breath moving up into my chest, I can just practice. How would I breathe down low? And am I breathing fast or am I breathing slow? And it kind of doesn't matter what you're doing. You can always slow down, right? You can always take that slow, intentional breath, even if it's just one or two of them.
Wow.
But let's say every time I check my phone, let's just argue I do that 20 times a day. I also check and I make that little modification of my breath. It's like mouth to nose, chest to belly, fast to slow.
Mm-hmm.
That starts to kind of like carve out this little groove in our brain. And that's going to make that a little bit more automatic so that I'm just kind of like reverting back to this type of breath that is optimal, right? That's supporting the nervous system. The tricky part for so many people is they're not aware of their breath at all,
Yeah.
right? And there's a reason for that. You take 20, 25,000 breaths every day. Like, imagine if you noticed every single one of them. You wouldn't get a lot done,
Yeah.
It's actually designed, our brain kind of relegates breathing to the background because there's too many other things for me to pay attention to.
Yeah.
But when I can actually start to practice paying attention to my breath, it makes me more aware of my breath, right? And so I get these little opportunities of like, oh, I'm breathing pretty quickly right now. Maybe I should slow down. Oh,
Yeah.
I feel my breath is right up in my chest. Let me drop that back down to my diaphragm. Those
Mm.
little moments that I notice it and then change it, they start to stack up. right? And that will begin to kind of like change someone's baseline in terms of, I'm a little bit of a type A, go, 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 anxious, right? We can slowly start to change the baseline for someone that says, well, I'm actually starting to feel just more calm in general, right? Because I've changed a channel, change a channel, change a channel over and over, that starts to become a little bit more automatic.
Yeah. Wow, that's so helpful. Can we talk a little bit about breathing through our nose or our mouth? Because as I started to learn about the breath, and I don't know a ton about it, but even just in the last year or so, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a mouth breather. Like I never even realized. And I look back at like old clips of podcast interviews and my mouth is open the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm sitting there listening and I'm like, oh my gosh. And now, so recently in the last 6-ish months or so, even when I'm exercising, like all these things, I'm just trying to be more conscious about breathing. We just moved to Houston and we're in this like skinny tall house, so it has 4 stories, so there's a lot of stairs. And I homeschool my kids on the 4th floor, and like every time I get up there I just want to like open my mouth and be like, like breathing heavily through my mouth. And I'm trying to be more aware of breathing through my nose, and I don't even know if that's right all the time, but I would love you to just teach us a little bit about the difference and when we might want to be intentional about whether we're breathing through our nose or our mouth.
Yeah. You just said a really important word there, Michelle, right? Intentional. It's very easy for like mouth breathing to get kind of like demonized, right? It's bad. Okay. It's like, and yeah, if unintentionally or if unconsciously or if all the time you're breathing through your mouth, it's terrible, right? I resonate with what you just said because I was a mouth breather until I was about 28, 29, so the vast majority of my life. Yeah. And I would look back at photos and I'm just like, I actually remember I was traveling in South America and I met these 4 Irish girls that I traveled with for a while. And we would be like at monuments and stuff. And they would always come up to me and like, like close my chin because, and I reflect on that. I'm like, oh my goodness, but so like why I kind of share that is like, I would now call myself predominantly a nasal breather. It took me probably about a month to 2 months of like dedicated practice to go from like just consistent mouth breathing to consistent nose breathing. The changes that I saw in my sleep, my energy, I even lost weight, right? Like my reactivity, like everything changed. It's like one of the greatest unlocks I see for myself and the clients that can do that. Yeah. It's huge because again, just coming back to the nervous system, like when we're breathing through our mouth, that's a signal to my nervous system that we might need lots of energy, right? Mouth breathing is appropriate if I'm sprinting away from the tiger, right? But if I'm doing it all of the time, I'm continually sending that message, right, that we need to be ready to run away. Yeah. The other thing that happens when we're breathing with our mouth is it's much harder to actually use the diaphragm. The diaphragm needs a little bit of resistance, right? Like anyone listening can do this. If you just open your mouth really wide and take a big breath in, you'll kind of feel what happened, right? Your chest lifted up. Now, if you just now do the exact same breath but with your nose, you'll feel it's like, oh, maybe it's a little bit lower. It was kind of like out in the sides. What's happening is because these little holes, my nostrils, create some resistance to the air, it kind of forces my diaphragm to be like, oh, we got to do a bit of work here to pull the air in. So when we're breathing with our mouth, because there's no resistance, we just kind of pull the air into the top of the lungs and we can tend to use the muscles of our neck. Both of those things are really sympathetic nervous system. And so we see this all the time, right? Someone that's just a chronic mouth breather that are stuck in that fight or flight response, that can't switch off, that are anxious, that are panicked, that aren't sleeping well, that are fatigued. And a lot of that is coming back to, it's like, well, we're just consistently disrupting our physiology. Yeah. And so coming back to this intentional piece, right? Like, yeah, if you're going to sprint up a hill or you're running a race, right? Like mouth breathing can be really effective. You can move more air, but it comes at a cost. Right? It comes at this cost of like we're less efficient with oxygen and carbon dioxide. It's more sympathetic nervous system, it's poorer recovery. So we do want to try and prioritize breathing through our nose 99% of the time, honestly. Like you found, right? Like layering that into while I walk the dog or while I'm exercising is a really great way to build your capacity. But if you've been a mouth breather for a really long time and then you're like, I'm going to breathe through my nose, right? And you're on a run and you try and keep your mouth closed. It's like, it's like, it's going to feel like claustrophobic and really uncomfortable because we've adapted to breathing through our mouth. So we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace. It's like, it's not an overnight fix where I just decide to go back to nasal breathing. You'll find that really tricky. But the more that you pay attention to it and keep your mouth closed whilst you go for a walk, whilst you do some yoga, whilst you're lifting weights in the gym, whatever it might be, is like we're starting to rebuild our capacity to tolerate nasal breathing.
Oh my
And the
gosh.
benefits of nasal breathing, just like, it's one of those really like, it goes on and on and on, you know, our physiology, our energy, our immune system, right? Like our nose is the first line of defense for our immune system. We actually have this lining in our nose. We create this beautiful molecule called nitric oxide, like that kills pathogens. Like none of that happens when I breathe through my mouth.
Yeah.
And so like breathing through my mouth just makes it harder for my body, right? Like I've now got to recruit these different responses versus just like dealing with it in the nose.
Yeah.
The nose humidifies the air, it warms it, it slows it down. And there's this really interesting research, right? Like we have these little nerve endings that come down from the brain into the top of the nasal cavity. And the speed of the air that's coming through the nose determines whether the brain's in a state of arousal, right? Fast thinking, or really slow and calm.
Wow.
And so like meditation, what is meditation, right? It's this slow breath awareness. And a lot of the research is showing it's how quickly the air is moving through the nasal cavity that determines how active and awake and alert the brain is. And so it's like whether we're talking brain, whether we're talking energy, whether we're talking immune system, whether we're talking like my nervous system, my digestion, all these things, like nasal breathing is such an easy unlock in terms of, again, it just requires a little bit of awareness and practice and consistency. But I've seen it change people's life, you know, like in terms of their level of anxiety, their energy, their fatigue, just from this one change, right? And I'm not going to say it's necessarily an easy change. It does require some practice and some awareness, but it's possible for everyone.
For sure. That's so fascinating. I could like geek out on this stuff all day. It's so fascinating. What about when we're sleeping? Should we be mouth taping, or like is that like if we know we mouth breathe while we sleep?
Yeah, this is a really this is, so like I tape my mouth every night, and if I don't, I mouth breathe, right? And I'll wake up in the morning and my lips are dry and I just feel yucky, you know, like I haven't slept as well, you know. And so I wouldn't say I necessarily need, but I are on the side of like mouth tape for me is really, really helpful.
Okay.
But if you're a mouth breather and you think the solution is I'll just pop some tape on my mouth at night, but I'll do nothing else, that's kind of like slapping a Band-Aid on an open wound, you know, like that's not going to fix the problem. It may slightly improve, you know, your sleep quality, but if you're breathing through your mouth at night, I guarantee you're breathing through your mouth during the day. You know, like we don't have a different type of breathing because, you know, it's like we're just doing more of the same thing. Yeah. And so if you're like a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to do mouth taping. I'm like, well, what have you done during the day to build your capacity? Because just slapping on that piece of tape at night doesn't solve a problem. Right? It's kind of like using a pair of crutches. Like they're great, you know, but we also want to like rehabilitate the injury in a way.
Yes.
And so like practicing nasal breathing during the day, like I will often get people to put a little bit of mouth tape on while they're cleaning the house or while they're just like, and if you can start to tolerate that for 20 minutes or so, then great. You'll probably be fine taping at night, and that's will kind of like deepen the quality of your sleep, and it will improve, you know, that the ability to nasal breathe. But a lot of times people can't tolerate nasal breathing during the day. They're probably not going to be able to tolerate it at night.
Okay, interesting. So titrate it, ease yourself into it.
Exactly. You know, it's like, and there's nothing wrong with trying it, right? But I would say it's like also address the root of the problem, not just try and manage it with, you know, a Band-Aid.
Almost literally.
Literally.
Okay. I want to ask you about something else. I don't want to go like too far down a rabbit hole, but this is just interesting to me. And you mentioned it when you got more intentional about breathing through your nose instead of your mouth, you also lost weight. And I think people don't understand how much of, if they have weight to lose and that's, you know, something that would serve them better in their health, how much of that actually happens through our breath. Is that true? Like, tell me more about that.
It is. And the big part to understand here, like this concept of kind of second order thinking, or what I would sometimes call relational thinking. And so if I was just to say, if someone tuned into this podcast, I'm like, breathing through your nose helps you lose weight. Some people are going to be like, what are you talking about? Right? But if we come back to what a lot of this conversation has already been centered around, which is the nervous system, right? When I'm in that sympathetic state, there's more cortisol. Cortisol causes me to retain calories and weight, right? It's the survival thing of like the famine might be coming, so I'm going to kind of hold on to calories. Yeah. So if I'm in a high stress state, it's very hard to lose weight. my
Yeah.
body is not prioritizing it. It's actually prioritizing retaining calories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's how it is designed. Like that is what cortisol does.
Yeah.
It drives blood sugars into the cells for storage.
Yeah.
And so if I was to go from mouth breathing, sympathetic nervous system, to nasal breathing, parasympathetic nervous system, that will likely have an impact on my cortisol, right?
Yeah.
And that reduction in cortisol may then allow me to begin letting go of some of that weight because my body's not in this like conservation survival strategy.
Yeah.
And so like that little, piece of understanding, okay, what does breath do to stress and what does
Mm-hmm.
stress do to my ability to lose weight? Now we can kind of see a clear link between how shifting our breathing can directly impact or indirectly impact my ability to lose weight.
Wow. Yeah. There's so much trickle down, so many different areas. Yeah.
And that's where I get super interested, right? Like a lot of people want to pick holes in something, right? Where it's like, I had this question from our students yesterday regarding like breath and hormones, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had a client that was struggling with hormone fluctuations and low in some and high in others. And we were talking about like, well, how breath might be a piece of that. And
Mm-hmm.
again, the immediate thought is like, how the hell would changing your breathing do anything to your hormones, right? But if we understand that axis of like, okay, my stress and what is required to produce cortisol and the resources allocated and things like estrogen, testosterone, it's like these are all coming from the same place. And so if my body's in a high stress state, that will change my endocrine system,
Yeah.
And so how do I get my body out of that high stress state? Well, one of the most effective ways is to start to change the breath.
Yeah.
And so we're not saying like changing breathing is going to influence your estrogen, right? But if changing breathing impacts your stress response,
Yeah.
then absolutely it's going to have an influence on your endocrine system and your hormone profile. And so like whenever people feel internally this little bit of resistance or a bit of wait, it's like think of that kind of second order. If this did that and then that did the next thing, it's like, yeah, I could see that how that will have an impact.
Yeah. The dominoes.
The dominoes.
Yeah. Um, okay, this is so good. I would love for you to speak to the moms that are listening. First of all, we kind of talked about this a little bit before we hit record, but the impact of breath, the power of breath when it comes to periods of pregnancy and postpartum, just in our body and how we can harness the power of our breath during that time. And then I want to talk a little bit about talking to our kids about breath and how we can teach them to use their breath and co-regulating with them. But let's start about like the mom and her body and what breath can do to help her.
Yeah, this is it's a topic I'm super passionate about. And I always we have a lot of moms that come through our program where I'm like, you have to kind of carry this torch forward because I'm not a mom, right? I'm a dad to 2 young kids and I'm a husband to a beautiful mother. And so my experience of this comes secondhand, but it also comes from working with a lot of moms who tell me the exact same story. And so I think there's this huge missing piece, right, for a mother going through this experience of pregnancy, which is an understanding of what is happening to the breath. So if we look at this through kind of 3 lenses,
okay,
the first being like structurally and biomechanically, right? Like growing a baby, right? Your diaphragm gets pushed out of the way, right? Your rib cage changes its shape and its orientation. Now, we have to understand like breathing is one of the most adaptive processes in the body. It's always adapting to whatever changes are happening, right? So that 40 weeks, right, where there's this growing baby and my diaphragm's getting pushed further and further, my rib cage is changing shape, I'm learning to breathe more up into your chest, right?
Yeah.
If you reflect, I'm not sure how old your kids are, Michelle, but if you reflect to between 36 and 40 weeks, how easy was it for you to take a nice big diaphragmatic breath, right?
Oh my gosh.
It's not even there. Like you can only breathe up into your chest.
Time. Yeah.
That's the only capacity you have because of, there's no room.
Yeah.
And so what we want to remember is you're learning to do that, right? And so number one, kind of structurally, like the changes in the body are determining or are changing the way that you breathe habitually, 25,000 times a day. Oh. Number two is if we think almost hormonally, right? Progesterone is a really interesting hormone that actually increases our sensitivity to carbon dioxide, right? This is the gas we breathe out. Carbon dioxide is actually what causes how fast we breathe, right? So the more sensitive I am to carbon dioxide, the faster I breathe. The faster I breathe, the higher my heart rate and the more sympathetic nervous system. Progesterone goes up 10x from conception to delivery. Yeah. So now we have this second piece that I'm learning to breathe faster and shallower because of the hormones. Third piece being nervous system, right? I can speak to this as a dad, and I'm sure many mothers, resonate as well. Like that first few days of a new life, this vulnerable little thing, it's chaos, right?
First
Like
few
there's no
years.
preparation, there's no user manual. Like it's just like you're thrown into the thick of it.
Yeah.
And like the state that puts your nervous system into is understandably a very sympathetic threat detection, vigilance. It's like that caring comes through, but it's a nervous system. And we don't always want to think of the sympathetic nervous system as bad, right? That's how you protect, that's how you care, right? But it's a very energy demanding state to be in.
Yeah.
So we got this kind of like little recipe now, right? Where like biomechanically, I've learned to breathe differently. Physiologically or hormonally, I've learned to breathe differently. And nervous system, I'm now in a pretty heightened state. We then have, right, this postpartum period where, yes, hormones are all over the place, right? But my breathing will continue to do what it's done, right? So I'll continue to breathe like my diaphragm is all pushed out of the way. I'll continue to breathe shallower and faster, right? Yeah. And that constant state of vigilance that's very hard to get out of because my breathing does not suggest to my nervous system it's time to switch off because it's still shallow, it's still fast, it's still up in my chest.
Yeah.
And so having an understanding that there's nothing, these changes are meant to happen, but let's understand the impact that it has long term, right? And that there are things that I can do in that postpartum phase to bring my breath back to a state where it actually supports my nervous system rather than keeps it in the fire, right? So what would happen if we taught mothers, right? Here's a practice that you can do now to help you kind of like find this home base, right? Which is this parasympathetic state, which is this calm, grounded state, right? That the better you got at accessing that now before baby arrives, the easier it is for you to access that state after baby arrives.
Yeah.
Right? It's pretty hard to learn regulation when you're just surviving. Like tell a new mom who's got a 5-day-old, we want you to practice this new thing. It's like just
last thing on my list.
Right?
Yeah.
No, it's just that there's zero capacity for that.
Yeah.
But at week 20 through to week 40, taking 10 minutes every day to practice, right? Finding this state. It's then in those moments, right? For those first few weeks and arguably first few years, it's just like, I kind of know where I'm going. I know how to get to this state that feels calm and grounded and safe. So even if, right, I'm having a hard time, it's like, I've done the work prior, right? And I can do this practice to create a little sanctuary of safety, even if it's just for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Even if it is just for those few moments here and there. That's very, very important because our nervous system works. It's kind of like switching between these states. Wow. So if I can access that little bit of recovery and a little bit of safety, even if just momentarily, before I'm back into caring, preparing, it's like, but I have the ability to manually do that. It changes, right? In terms of like the cumulative effect of being in a stressful state, the long-term impact of just not being able to switch off. And now my sleep's impacted even more so than just the newborn, it's really interesting when we kind of play that out over the coming months. And so I think a little bit of an investment up front of sharing with an expecting mother, here's how you access your parasympathetic nervous system. Here's some practices that you can do postpartum to start to bring yourself back to that more diaphragmatic breath, right? To restore the way that you're breathing, to kind of counteract the adaptations that have occurred through the previous, period of gestation, so that we can start to use your breath to actually support your nervous system rather than keep pushing it further into a stress response.
That makes so much sense. And I wonder, those of us like my kids even now are 8 and 6, but if we've been breathing like that for as long as we've had kids, right? Because we just haven't been aware of it and we're wondering what's going on. And that's a huge part of it, I'm sure.
I mean, I think that's so common.
Yeah.
Right. But again, without this information, it's just like, this is just the new state that I'm in. I guess this is me as a mother, right? Yeah. Like maybe that there's, your breathing is adapted and it hasn't kind of gone back, right? Because we need to provide new stimulus for it to adapt back to a better state. And I've had that experience that you just shared, Michelle, right? A mother that's got a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old, where it's like, we start doing this work and they're like, oh my goodness, it's like, I feel like I've got back to my old me. I just assumed that was gone. That was pre-mother me, but perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps it was because this impact that pregnancy may have had on my breathing, and that is choosing the channel of the nervous system.
Wow.
And just to give this as an example outside of pregnancy, I see the same thing occurring, right? Someone has a really bad back injury, for example, right?
Mm,
If you've ever experienced back pain, you'll know, it's like, what do you do when you roll over in bed or get out of the car or pick up your kid? You hold your breath, right? You
yeah.
brace, and so that can be a learned thing. So someone hurts their back, their breathing adapts and it changes. So they stop breathing low and deep and slow and they start breathing up here. The
Yeah.
back pain resolves, but the breathing doesn't. And so
Wow.
I'll often see people, it's like, oh yeah, I had that, nasty back injury 5 years ago. And then 3 years ago was when my anxiety started. And then my panic attack
Mm,
started. And it's like, it's like, am I saying that's the only cause? No. But it's a huge consideration that if you learn to breathe differently because of pregnancy, because of back pain, because of a period of chronic stress,
yeah.
then that will sometimes become ingrained. And now that breathing pattern is perpetuating the feelings of stress in your body because my body is always listening to my breath to tell me what's happening in the world. So
Mm,
we can kind of like these things that we think are maybe insignificant or not connected can have a huge impact because just the sheer volume, right? I breathe 25,000 times a day and do
yeah.
that over 3-4 years. Yeah, it gets pretty like ingrained.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Um, how long does it take for our breath to have an impact on our physiology? Because I think like there's a lot of women listening I know that are like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. This is so fascinating. And I don't think I have time for like a breathwork practice or like my morning routine. I'm so sick of people telling me I need like 45 minutes to do whatever it is,
Yeah.
But I know even in my own experience, like, there are times when like I will just take a few breaths in a different way and I can feel it just like releasing and decompressing. And then I'm able to proceed in a different way. So can you just talk to the people who are like, this all sounds great, but I don't think I have time for
Yeah.
any of
And this is
this?
such an important question, right? Depends on how we're framing what breathwork is.
Okay.
If people think breathwork means I have to lay down on my yoga mat, put on the music, light the candle, and breathe for 30 minutes, then yeah, it's really inaccessible, particularly for new moms,
Yeah.
right? Like, just there are no extra 30 minutes in the day. Like, but if I see breathwork as just the way that I'm using my breath,
Mm,
then anything can be breathwork,
so
right? It's like baby's napping and I'm going for a walk. How am I breathing for that 15, 20 minutes?
so
If
good.
I'm unconscious, maybe I'm breathing through my mouth. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
breathing in my chest. Maybe I'm wondering why I still feel reactive. And it's because I'm not using that as an opportunity to do breath work, even
Yeah.
though I'm just going for a walk, right? You already mentioned, like, whilst you're exercising, it's like we're already doing all these things.
Yeah.
Breath work in my mind is just bringing a little bit more intention to what my breath is doing whilst I'm doing everything else in life. While you're cleaning the dishes, how are you breathing? Like,
Yeah.
that matters. And so bringing that little piece of intentionality, it's like I don't necessarily have to find more time in the day. I just have to be
Yes.
more intentional. I have to have more awareness of, like, whilst I'm doing these things, what if I, did this with my breathing? What if I went from mouth to nose? What if I breathe in a
Yeah.
cadence? I breathed in for 4 seconds and out for 4 seconds while I was walking.
Mm-hmm.
That means that there's endless opportunity and I don't have to find more time and it doesn't feel like an additional demand. It's
Yeah.
just like another layer or a lens that I'm kind of adding to what I'm already doing.
Uh,
But to the practical piece of what you're saying, like, we can see a response in like 5 seconds,
mm-hmm.
like, and we often already know that. Like, you get home at the end of a really long day, you drop your bag down, you feel that. You
Yeah.
feel that big sigh of relief, right? That wasn't a 10-minute practice. That was one single breath,
Yes.
right? We fail to recognize, right, that I could take that intentional breath, or I could do that sigh 5 times, right? And that might take me 1 minute.
Yeah.
And that could be breath work, you
Yep.
know? I think that's so much more accessible to everyone, but particularly new moms, right? Where it's like, yeah, what if instead of thinking I have to do 20 minutes of breath work, I did 1 minute 10 times today or 20 times today?
Love it.
Like,
Yeah.
it's still going to stack up and accumulate, right?
Yep.
But it's way easier to find a minute than it is to find 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so freeing, right? It just like takes the obligation off and this whole like we have to have all this stuff for all this time. And it's really just a new way of being. It's like I'm just going to pay attention to my breath as I'm going about my day. And we can all do that. We all should be doing that. I want to talk a little bit before we let you go about teaching our kids about their breath because I think so many of us have been taught or heard or think it's the right thing to do, that when our kids are starting to get frustrated, angry, what have you, we want to be like, all right, take a deep breath and like teach. because we don't want to deal with whatever is coming, right? And we're like, we think it's the best way to do it. I'll speak for myself. And in my experience and in the things that I've learned, that's not always the most effective move to just tell our kids to breathe when they're already feeling dysregulated. So can you talk to us? I know you have young kids too, but a little bit about what might be a better approach or how you model or teach your children about breath.
Yeah. So you have to understand, the little ones, they like explaining something with reasoning or logic or why you should do this, just that part of their brain isn't developed yet.
Yeah.
Right. So we can't reason our way through of why to do this. But this aspect of co-regulation, right, is super important. And so instead of us trying to put it on our kids of like, hey, do this thing, we are probably in that moment a little bit heightened, right? Because yeah, we know the meltdown's coming, or we're trying to get out the door or whatever.
Yes.
And so in that moment where I'm expecting my kid to regulate, right, and be like, just take a breath, I should probably take a breath, right? And perhaps we could do that together.
Yeah.
But that element of you managing your nervous system, right? So much of what happens in this co-regulation, it's non-verbal, right? It's not because you told your kid to relax, it's because they felt you relax.
That's it.
So how do you do that?
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, right, it's like I'm asking my kid to do something and it's perhaps the same advice I need to be giving myself. It's easier to tell someone else what to do than to reflect. I'm like, oh wait, I'm heightened, I'm in a rush, right? Yeah. My 2-year-old doesn't know that I've got an appointment to get to, and it's like, yeah, my energy is really high and that makes their energy really high. Yeah. And me telling them to take a breath, it's ineffective, and simple. But if we really just try and think of like, okay, together, let's practice, let's do a breath together. I found it so interesting. So you just turned 3 last week, but probably for the last 6 months, so from a 2.5-year-old, he now says to me, what are you breathing about, Dad?
Wow.
So I've kind of like, I'll get off a call or I'm feeling stressed with something at work and I'm starting to take a couple of big breaths and he watches and he says, what are you breathing about? And it's so like, in the moment, I'm like, I'm breathing about you, like, but it's such a beautiful thing because he's watching me self-regulate, right? Yeah. And he's curious about that. So I don't have to tell him what to do. I have to show him what to do.
Yeah.
And what a wonderful thing that if more of us were able to model self-regulation to our little ones, and imagine a world where we taught this in schools, it's like, this leads into how do I manage and regulate my emotions, my energy, my stress levels, my big feelings, right? Yeah. Like so much of that should be starting with this modeling, right? Of like, oh, I see that when you get upset or stressed, you turn back to your breath and you do something. How can I do that? And that's not going to come through instruction, right? It's going to come through modeling. Yeah. And so I do my best to, instead of telling my little boy what to do, it's like, oh, wait, he's reflecting back to me how I'm feeling. Yes, I'm actually a little bit rushed and stressed. So like, let me take a moment. And I know he's watching, if he wants to join in or if I can turn it into something that's a little bit more fun. Yeah. And so like that being the second piece, like telling a 5-year-old to do a breathing exercise, they're like, what? But if we do dragon's breath or if we do secret breathing or if we do the ninja breath, like turning this into something that's a little bit more fun. As long as we understand a little bit of the kind of mechanism, it's like, okay, so if I get you to breathe out for a really long time, that's going to help with the parasympathetic nervous system. So like, what if we play a game of like, who can, make the candle flicker without going out? And so we're breathing really slowly and softly. Beautiful. Right? Like, so we try and turn that into a little bit of a game of dragon's breath, or we do secret breathing. It's like, who can breathe the quietest and the softest and the slowest, right? I know in my brain, right, it's like, okay, what's happening with physiology and how the nervous system, who cares, right? Like he doesn't need to know that. I know that when he slows his breath down, that is going to impact how he feels. Yeah. And so I want him to have the felt sense rather than, I have a bad habit. This is just, I'm a teacher, right? Like I like to try and explain things and teach, but that doesn't work for a 3-year-old. Yeah. But I want him to feel what happens. And so firstly is me modeling how I'm regulating myself. Right. And so he gets a picture of that. Yeah. And then turning it into a little bit of a game. So it's not me telling you what to do. It's an instruction. It's a thing you have to do. It's like, it's a game. It's fun. Like, let's play this fun game together.
I love it. Oh my gosh, this is so helpful. I know that the women listening are walking away, with a new appreciation for their breath. I'm going to start mouth taping at night because I know I need to, and I know it's going to make me feel better. And you've just found a way to make something that I think can be so mundane, or just not even mundane, but we don't really just even pay attention, really fascinating and really practical. So I'm just so grateful for you being here. Thank you for your time and your wisdom and all your knowledge. And for the people listening who want to learn more and stay connected with you and learn from you and all the things, where can they find you?
Yeah, the best place is on Instagram, at Breath Body Therapy. And I try and, just make this as practical as possible. Like a lot of people's exposure to breath work is like breath work, right?
Yeah.
It's like 20 people in a room hyperventilating and crying. And it's like, do I need that? Probably not. It's like, but if I can have an understanding of what I can do in that 10 seconds, like
Yeah.
whilst my kid is melting down, like these really like,
Real
you don't
life.
have to understand all the science behind it, but
Yeah.
you do understand like what can I do and how can that impact me? Like that's my goal there. And so if anyone does have questions, mums, dads, that how can we use this or how can I teach this to my kid? Like it's a topic I'm obviously very passionate about. So I'd just encourage people to reach out, ask any questions they have. But I also appreciate the opportunity to come and share because I often reflect honestly, like parenthood it's a pretty challenging thing, and it's like I reflect on like how different my experience as a dad would be if I didn't have these tools.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
even as I'm saying this, I get a little bit of chills, right?
Mhm.
Like I could just see, and I know other dads that I've worked with that aggression, right? I don't know how to manage this screaming child, and they don't know how to manage what's happening in their nervous system, and then we snap at each other and all these things. And so, like, I'm just super grateful that I kind of found this tool when I did, and
Yeah.
it's fundamentally made me a better dad, and a better partner. And
Amazing.
so, like, it's always nice to think of like, oh, it'd be great if I had this tool 8 years ago, that proverb of like best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, the next best time
Yeah.
is now,
Yeah.
so like it doesn't matter if your kids are 15 or 5 months old, it's like we still have an opportunity to start to cultivate a little bit more self-awareness, a little bit more understanding of how our body works. And I think that just kind of changes the trajectory, especially for our little ones. Like we're moving into an environment, an age where things are pretty unpredictable and there's a lot of stuff with internet, social media, and all these things that you and I probably didn't grow up with. That having that tool of like self-management, I think is going to be a fundamental skill, going further into the 21st century. And I think that has to come from home, right? It's not being taught in schools. It's not being taught by doctors. It's not, so like it does fall back to the mums and the dads that want to be proactive. And so this is where we start.
Oh, I love it. I could not agree more. And with all of that being said, like kudos to you guys listening, right? Like you cared enough to hit play on this episode, resource yourself with this tool that's always available, and turn around and really model it and teach it for your kids, like Campbell was saying. So, man, it's been such a pleasure, such a joy to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Michelle. Thank you.